Are control decks going to become an extinct species in the Magic ecosystem? Greetings, owners of fine luxury cardboard rectangles, and welcome to my video discussing whether control decks are going to be going away in Magic the Gathering. Now, the reason that I'm thinking about all of this is dwelling upon the banning of Nexus of Fate. Specifically, obviously, that was banned in just Arena. So when it comes to regular Magic, you can still play Nexus of Fate, and control decks are very much a thing. For now, for the time being. But you can't argue the fact that the Arena computer game is definitely influencing how Magic the Gathering is growing and being directed. Wizards of the Coast has put a lot of effort into promoting Arena and kind of molding the game around it in a way. They have actively admitted that they have changed the way that they design cards to make them more simplistic for ease of use in Arena. Also, you'll see the change of the wording. Like if you look at a card like Crawl Harpooner, the way that it's worded now is not the way that they used to word cards. And at first glance, if you're used to the old wording on cards, it's actually a bit confusing. And the reason that they have done this is to make it easier to program it into Arena. See, they've learned from their mistakes. What you have to do is you have to look at MTGO, the Magic the Gathering online client, which is the other way to play Magic Online, where you used to get to own all your cards and everything. It's the precursor to Arena. Now, that game has an incredible amount of flaws. There are so many cards that do not function properly. The list is insane. I tried to read them all out in a live stream once and discuss them all, and there was too many to go through. They run into problems all the time. So Arena has resulted in them changing the way that cards are being designed going forwards, and also errating previously existing cards to make it easier for Arena. Now, we've seen that specifically with a Johnny's Pridemate. I made a video on that, but to just roughly cover what went on, they changed the wording of a Johnny's Pridemate from a may ability into a must ability. And that actually makes a big difference in terms of how the card functions. Now, they did that specifically to try and save clicks on Arena. Now, all this demonstrates that they're willing to make changes to the actual cards when it comes to Arena. On top of that, you can see how much they like Arena when you look at things like they're creating events specifically to try at F&M that are based on Arena. They're trying to bring Arena-style formats of playing best-of-1 games to Friday Night Magic, where instead of playing 2 out of 3 matches, you play against 6 different people over the course of a night. These are actually being pilot tested. This is documented. This is a thing that's happening. So Wizards of the Coast is very much willing to change everything around Arena. Now, they've said, when they talked about banning Nexus of Fate, they talked about how if it's not fun for viewers to watch cards being played as well, that can be grounds for cards being banned. We've reached the era where if an Arena audience, someone watching on Twitch or something like it, is bored because of these control decks, that's an extra reason to ban the cards. So that we've got all these different layers that come about because of Arena that led to Nexus of Fate being banned only in Arena. We have Arena standard formats, but over time, does this mean that Wizards of the Coast is going to avoid making cards like Nexus of Fate going forwards? Are they going to try and look at cards and go, okay, this is going to create a boring environment? Watching control decks can be very dull because control decks are the most non-interactive kind of interaction you can have, where they're essentially just trying to stop you from playing the game. That's the idea, is to control you. It's not to best you. It's not to beat you down through combat. It's to control you and the game. Now, in the past, Wizards of the Coast has made changes that have nothing to do with Arena that involve non-interactive nature. Anybody who's been playing Magic for a long, long time will remember how frustratingly strong land destruction used to be. If you go all the way back to the beginning of Magic, there were cards like Sinkhole that for 2 mana, only 2 mana, you can destroy a land. So if you were going first, you could start destroying your opponent's lands with the first lands that they played. Now, if you've never faced off against dedicated land destruction, let me tell you, it's the absolute most frustrating way to not play Magic there is, where you just sit there and your opponent destroys the lands. You know how bad it feels when the arena shuffler screws you over, or just normally drawing off your deck, you can get no lands, you barely have any lands, you're just struggling to get the mana you need to cast your spell. It's one of the most frustrating aspects of Magic the Gathering. Well, land destruction pretty much made that a reality for your opponent in every game, and it was very viable. So over the years, they have nerfed land destruction very, very hard. In fact, you will be hard-pressed to find any card that can destroy a land that costs less than 4 mana. Most land destruction spells now cost 4 mana or more, and that has removed land destruction decks as an archetype from Magic altogether. Land destruction decks used to be a thing. It used to be a solid part of Magic, and you could expect to see them with frequency. Like, you would see them on a fair number of occasions. Are we looking at a situation where control decks are going to go the same way, the way of the dodo, where they were delicious at one point for some people, but now they've all been eaten up and they're all gone? Is Wizards of the Coast going to keep changing how they design cards, specifically in terms of Arena, to the point where we no longer have control decks as we know them? Now, obviously, certain elements of control decks will always be around. I don't see them nerfing every style of card that would go into a control deck, but if they diminish the power level of all the different cards that come together to create these sort of control decks, then this may be the end of the control deck as we know it. If you look at the way they do card design now, they're doing things in a more simplistic and direct fashion. Look at, for example, the gates right now. When you look at a gates deck, it's pretty much pre-built for you by Wizards of the Coast, right? This isn't a deck that took anyone clever to come along and sort out. It's very obvious. You put a bunch of gates in as your lands, you put in your Gatebreaker Rams, you put in your Colossuses, you put in your Gates Ablaze, you put in your, what is that card, Guild Summit or whatever it is, the blue enchantment that lets you draw cards off of gates, the angel that gives you life. It's all very obvious. It's like a paint by numbers deck, where you really, there may be some minor tweaks you make yourself, but overall, the deck's already been built for you. It's not like the days of Dragon Maze, where they put in a bunch of gates and then they had Maze's End, where you could win the game using Maze's End, but overall, the rest of the deck's composition could be more open because there weren't a ton of cards that like really heavily leaned into the gates. But Wizards of the Coast has clearly decided to make a structural shift when it comes to set design to allow for these very obvious, here you go, we built the deck for you, they're all going to be the same. Forget net decking. We're entering the realm of pre-net decking, where before it even shows up, your deck's already been designed. It's the pre-constructed age, where Wizards of the Coast has pre-constructed a deck for you without really selling you a pre-con. So when you take all of this together, when you take the banning of Nexus, when you take the fact that they're adjusting cards like Ajani's Pridemate, when you take the fact that they're changing card design overall to make it easier for Arena, when you take into account the fact that they want the audiences, they care very much about the people who are watching people playing this game being engaged. They want Twitch audiences to be engaged and watching the game and excited. And control decks tend to not lead to that. That's not exciting, aside from only the most entrenched Magic players who are really into the meta, who are really hardcore, are going to enjoy watching control games, especially if it's control versus control. Those sort of mirror matches are they're just a snooze fest. Like my eyes are closing and trying to go to sleep just talking about it right now. For the majority of players, that's absolute boredom, an absolute waste of time. So are we moving into a future where control decks are no longer really going to be viable? Sure, this is just talking about standard. When it comes to modern or older formats, there's so many cards out there that there's no way, aside from an insane amount of bannings specifically designed to do that, we won't see the end of control decks outside of it. So this is just within the scope of standard. But it does seem to me that there is a genuine threat to the health of control decks in Standard. And I, for one, personally, I don't really care. If control decks go away, that's not really going to bother me that much. I don't enjoy really playing them, and I don't really enjoy playing against them. But that's just me. I know there are a number of people who really enjoy them, as they lament about the fact that I have no interest in playing them in direct challenges on Arena when they want to use their control decks. But hey, that is just a personal preference. If you enjoy control decks, that's totally fine. This was just an interesting avenue that my thoughts were walking down, and I thought to myself, you know what? Land destruction as an archetype is completely gone. Will we see the end of Standard control decks? Is this the beginning of the end for them? Is the power level of control cards going to steadily decrease so that Wizards can engage Twitch audiences? Because I think that there is probably internally a lot of consideration given to how viewable Arena is. You can see it with all the little sounds and bells and whistles that they include, the little dragons that'll fly across the screen when you play a demanding dragon, the worms that come surging up out of cards, even really simple cards like low-level dinosaurs make dinosaur noises when they show up. So they're trying to make the game more engaging, have little like, oh look, there's a little scorpion crawl alongside, you can click on blah, blah, blah. So they're going to, in my opinion, going forward, be looking to get rid of things that are actively disengaging. And I believe that control may be in their targets. They may be looking to kind of nerf the level of control. But that's just my opinion based on those factors. So I want to know what you guys think about that. Let me know in the comments below.